It was interesting because it was the paint that came off of one of those spacecraft. Which was it? The command module or shuttle and the damage that it did?
Oh, the shuttle. They claim that just a small flake of paint hit the window, and it just looks like a bullet hit the window. That was done just by a flake of paint hitting the window. You imagine if it actually was a solid object. It would have gone right through. It looks like, bulletproof glass when it gets hit with a 50 caliber bullet, but it's just a painted flake actually hit it.
I mean, that's crazy. That is just a flake of paint. And this is supposed to be bulletproof glass, close to it. I mean, it's thick glass we're talking about in the shuttle windows. So my question is, when all this stuff was flaking off or burning off of the command module, one tiny little flake of that material hit the window, it would be like this. But we don't see any damage to the windows, do we? And they can't say that the paint comes off or a blat of material burns away and then it just goes flying out. Well, then, if that's the case, then how did this paint hit the window when the window was in front of the ship?
Yeah. And if it hit, Scott, didn't you just say if it hit, it would have went right through?
When they're out there messing around, like on the ISS, and they lose a tool, right? Let's say they lose a socket or something like that, or they lose a wrench or an extension rod or something like that, or other pieces they're taking off, like big screws and stuff like that. They float away on them. If that actually hit the craft, it would simply go clean on through the craft. There's absolutely nothing to stop it at that speed. People don't understand that this is like 10 times faster than a speeding bullet. And therein again, we lose the concept of that, the amount of energy that's in that when it's hitting. That's a flake of paint doing that to a piece of glass, where even if it was traveling at the speed of a bullet, it wouldn't even leave a mark.
Yeah, and they actually depict that reality in movies and related TV series that are based on that. They actually depict the real thing, what would really happen if a microscopic object was to hit a spacecraft. It'll just penetrate right through to the other side. It'll come out clean. But yet when it comes to NASA, with all the spacecraft that they claim to have up there, and, it's amazing to me that there's never been an incident with the ISS. It's got to be traveling through bombardment. I mean, that's just common sense, right? And you never hear of any incident. I haven't heard anything in the last several years regarding, once in a while they put out the narrative that there was a nick, but there's no nick. It'll go right through the space station. When you hear this narrative, it's a nick or it bounced off or it just scratched or something like that. But given all the dust particles and minute particles that are constantly coming through the atmosphere, isn't it interesting that the ISS seems to sidestep that? I haven't heard anything about it being hit. Have you? I'm talking about going clean through. It never seems to go through. I mean, if it's going to go through from one side to the other.
No.
There isn't that, and it would go clean through.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. They'll throw in that narrative that there was a hit, a micrometeoroid hit, something of that nature, and then they'll just show this little nick like you just talked about with the command module, and that's just to keep that narrative going. But in reality, if that were to happen, it would go right through the spaceship, and you would have a serious situation happening there.
Yeah. You know what scares me, though, is these guys, when they're out collecting the film, and they're out doing that spacewalk, when they're picking that up, they have to scoot down the craft and grab the rails and, haul themselves down there and then come back. Well, what's protecting them? Because if they're out there, you think that they're going to get hit by something, because you could see little pieces of debris kind of floating around. But, it's from them. I get that. But all they need is any of that debris, micrometeor particles or anything in it, it's going to literally just go right through that suit. But these guys say, oh, no, well, it's a Whipple shield effect on the suit, and it won't go through them because it has 14 layers to that suit.
I don't know where they get this information from. Obviously, they're getting it from some kind of NASA document. I mean, the NASA documents are going to be in favor and in support of the Apollo missions. When people, you have to go deep, very deep. And when you go deep into NASA documents, you find contradictions.
But even when these guys are outside there, I would be scared to death not to get creamed by a piece of anything out there while I'm out there.
Yeah, look at the amount of space junk that they say that's floating around out there from all the stuff. But Here's the torrid swarm that we go through twice a year that we get our nice, shooting stars from. And this thing's been up there for more than 20 years and never had a problem.
No, that's what I'm getting at. I mean, It's just incredible that it just seems to, run between the raindrops. This thing never gets affected by anything. I find it a little too suspicious. Hey, I'm not saying it's fake. ISS is fake. There's something up there you could see with a telescope. I just like this whole narrative about sending astronauts up there without any means of getting them back unless there was an emergency, supposed to be stranded up there. I mean, I'm just not buying that crap anymore. I mean, I don't know why buy this crap. NASA lies. They're just like any other government agency. They lie all the time. It's a psyops, people. It's a psyops. And NASA is predicated on a cult. So you have to look at that aspect of it too. And, it goes very deep down the rabbit hole when it comes to NASA. I mean, they just lie all the time. I mean, that's all they do is lie. I mean, I just don't know why some people are still buying it, or unless they're being paid to buy it.
Here we are, Neil. So do you want to explain what's going on then?
Yeah, so this is in Portland in the UK on the southwest, and Ben came to visit me in 2023, in the summer of 2023, and we're in Portland Stone Quarry there. We thought we'd show Ben around, but it actually has a very moon rocks and things, and that's my wife and myself and Ben, and we bought this flag off Amazon, and you can see me there throwing a load of water over this flag to kind of test it. That was the general aim. And of course, I think it is a nylon flag, but I just wanted to see the effects of whether we could see dampness or whether it's just going to be shadows, as the Apollo believers say. You can see us examining it there. Now, of course, this is dripping wet. And there's been people saying, well, the flag in the Apollo 17 wasn't dripping wet, but you can definitely see a difference in tones there as the wetness goes on and there's the dry areas. Now, of course, the flag in Apollo 17 isn't dripping wet because, I mean, it's like a T-shirt. You don't hang a T-shirt out dripping wet unless you don't bother wringing it out. And it's quite possible that that flag, when it was photographed on the alleged moon surface or the set, it might have been there for maybe 2 or 3 hours and any drips have long since disappeared. And there's still damp drying back. Now, it's the same case here. We've got this flag here. It's in the heat of the sun. So it is starting to dry back fairly quickly. Any drips would soon evaporate anyway. But you can definitely see a change in the tones as the wetness goes on. It's like anything like a T-shirt or a sheets or anything of cotton material maybe as well. But there was a guy, I think it was NASA Loving Psychopath, he calls himself. He did an Apollo wet flag test in the bath and he soaked his Apollo wet flag in the bath completely and it was just completely wet. But he said he could see nothing there that would make him convinced that the Apollo 17 flag is damp. You can see it drying out with darker tones. It's not shadows. Of course, if you scrunch up the flag, you're going to create shadows. And you can see some dark shadows there as the flag creases. But you can definitely see some water tones caused by the dampness in there. And you can see me pointing it out there, the different tones, the lightness and the darkness within the stars. And yet that is the sunlight hitting it directly, which is the case of Scott's wet flag that he discovered on the Apollo 17 mission. And as I was saying, there was a guy, I think, in the forums discussing this, and he said he's tested it out using a flag in his bathtub where he completely immersed it. And he said it was dripping wet, and your flag on your photograph is not dripping wet on the Apollo 17 photograph. So it means it's not wet. But of course, you've got to really think about this. This flag on the Apollo 17 moon set was probably up there maybe a day or a half or something like that. Any drips would have long fallen away, and it's just merely drying back like any material would, like a T-shirt or a sheet or a top of a shirt or something like that. And it's the same with our flag. Yes, it was initially dripping wet once we sprayed the water on it, but within a few minutes, that dampness started to evaporate. And you can see myself there pointing out to Ben and everybody else where the wet patches are. Yeah, and it's picking up a bit of gloss in it because it's very, very wet. But obviously, when you put a T-shirt out in the sun, it's not going to go glossy straight away because it's damp. It depends on the material you're spraying, I think, to a certain extent.
I remember we were up at Portland Bill, weren't we? Great, it was a lovely spot actually. We were standing there, there's lots of people around, and they stepped watching us, wondering what the hell we were doing. It's quite funny. But of course, we are looking at a piece of textile there. I know it's not the same. I think it was canvas, the flag they apparently used for Apollo 17, so it's slightly different. But the point we were making was that when it comes to radiation, it's affected by other things such as the presence of air, also the color of the material. There's red, white, and blue on there, which is going to have an effect as well. As a result, the point was that would it dry evenly or not? And Neil's just answered that.
Yeah. So, Scott, as you discovered the Apollo 17 flag, any points you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm going to share the screen here, right there. And of course, model is a synthetic silk, and that's what the blue material is made of on here. The red and white is nylon. You can see the stars are raised, they're stitched in, and they were either made from jute or hemp. So I'll just blow this up so you can have a good look at this. Now, the way this flag is folded up, if they were doing a simulation on it and it started to rain and this flag is folded up like an accordion in, like that, and then after it quit raining, they come out and they opened it up. Because it's folded like that, the edges would start to dry off first, and when they open it up, it would still be wet inside. But you can actually see water drops here on the thing. And then people say, oh, it's just shadow. This is the shadow in there, and this is wet all the way along. You can see it wet all the way along. Now, if you look right in here, you can actually see the nylon's wet between here and here, between the fold. It's dry there and wet down on this section. It's a lot harder to see. You can see that in your own flag testing that you're doing. But the difference between nylon and model is very absorbent. And I mean, lots of companies use it. They use it for exercise stuff because it's very soft, artificial silk, but they can also make it nice and stretchy on the thing. When you see it here, you don't see too much of anything, but when you come in on that color in there, you can actually see it's wet right in through there. You can see it's dry there, but it's actually quite wet. It's only a slight difference when it's nylon. But of course, the model, because it is different, and the flag is described as being an official flag, which means it's made out of nylon, model, and jute.
You know, the funny thing is that when you go and look it up on ChatGPT or ChatGPT 4, because that's what Phase and those guys, you know, they like to use now because ChatGPT isn't accurate anymore. But anyways, when we looked this up, it was interesting because there was 5 different materials that flag was made out of. Now, there was like hemp, jute, model, and hemp. So what happened then is then we went and looked on Google to see, and it's back to nylon again. And then I went and looked at ChatGPT, the regular one, and they say nylon. So then I looked at Yahoo on their search engine, and again, nylon. So what's going on here? So then you look at the actual Apollo 11 flag, you look at the data that they have that on NASA's own website, that's when it comes up and tells you the 5 different types of material used in that flag. So I'm almost wondering if that flag, when it was folded properly, if it got wet somehow, and then when they unfolded it and went and did whatever they were doing there, I wonder if that's how it could have got damp like that.
They probably got caught in a rain shower because the ground is wet. You can see physically the ground is wet. It doesn't match their background set. It's a lot darker. And when you look through the rest of the EVAs in Apollo 17, then you can see it's drying out again. That surface is sitting there. Now it's matching their background scenery again.
All I know about that flag, I mean, you'd think they'd know what it was made of, because apparently the Apollo 17 flag was the one that hung in mission control for the earlier missions. That's what I've heard. And they decided to take it to the moon for Apollo 17.
They're not going to take a cheap flag for an official event. They're going to take an official flag. And an official flag is made out of those 3 materials.
Well, 5.
Yeah, but depending on what year. When the flag was initially created, nylon wasn't invented yet. So you're going to have a problem right there. You're going to have a cloth flag originally with hemp. The stars were made out of hemp. Those were the original. Now, the reason why it has 3 different materials and the way you officially fold it up, it's so all the stars are intact, because an official way to dispose of an American flag is to burn it. So the reason why the stars are stitched in like that, they're a denser material. So the rest of the flag will burn away, and the representation of the 50 states is sitting there. They'll be burning as individual pieces. As you dispose of an official flag is to actually burn it. And it's folded in a way so that the stars are there. That's why it has the 3 different materials that are in that. And like Robert's saying 5 is because some of the other versions of it, they do have several all the different materials that are in there. Some can be just cloth, not nylon.
No, well, the thing is if Phase and those other guys, NASA-loving psychopath, which I still believe is Phase, because I don't know how the heck he could have returned that mail that fast. If they want the flag to be the real flag with the model and the hemp and everything else, then why don't they cough the money up and send it to us and we'll test it for them? Or even better yet, why don't they pay for the flag and they do the test? Because it's the same with the film. Let's face it. Even if we got the right film, even if we paid $35,000 for a roll of that film from NASA, that supposedly the Apollo Magic film that they're claiming, they still wouldn't be satisfied. They wouldn't. It wouldn't matter what you did.
All you really need to do to test the difference between nylon and model or artificial silk is just buy a scarf made out of that material and just dip it in some water and pull it up, and you're going to see the color difference. You're going to see the difference on how much the difference between nylon soaks in and the color changes you'll see compared to the model. And that's exactly what you're looking at on the flag. That nylon is still wet. You can hardly see it. You take any of the versions of it, doesn't matter whether you're on Flickr or March to the Moon, doesn't matter where you take those images from or from the journal site. All those flags, they haven't changed them. At this particular time, they have not altered those flags that are up there, and you can see it.
That's another point, because when you go and look at these flags, they've really brightened up the blue areas so that you can't see it as much anymore.
On a website now, yeah, they just overbleed it, so it's just gone.
That's right. Of course, we have the original, and when you take the brightness down a little bit, it's wet. I mean, it's really bad. But not only that, it's also spotted. You could see where the drops of water actually, and this is what is so strange. It's like when you guys were spraying that flag with that bottle of water. You could see some of the drops actually hit and start rolling down. Yeah. That's almost what happens with that flag. You could see where the spots where it hit are drying out. So I don't know if that wouldn't make sense if it was folded, got wet, and then they put it up, because how would those spots get there? That's really strange. Doesn't make sense.
Unless it was literally rain, like Scott, like you said, it was a rainstorm. I mean, maybe it was raining and they said, okay, we'll film after the rain's finished, stopped. It was an outdoor studio.
And it was still folded at the time. It's just laying there folded, and then they open it up and the edges have already dried off.
I mean, it could be that they had one more take to do and they only had like so much time to do it. This actually happens when making real movies. They say, okay, we have to do this take now because then we have to move on to another scene and things like that. There's a schedule you have to stick to. And we don't know, this could have been made in a hurry. This footage could have been shot in a hurry. But obviously the pre-production notes are not there, and we didn't have access to the directors' meetings or anything like that. So
I think maybe, Ben, we should repeat that test maybe next summer and have 2 flags, the one I gave to you, and then I'll buy another one, and we'll wet one and leave one dry and film them side by side.
That's a good idea, Neil. We have a controller. Something else has come to mind. If you remember Jarrah's little video about the Lunar Observer probe, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, he mentions that you can actually see the flags in some of the shots. Yet, would these flags still exist? I mean, according to some pundits, they would exist, but they would be bleached. The colour would have been drained out of them. And indeed, in the film Leave the World Behind, you see the lunar flags and they're just grey because there's no colour on them because they've been there for so long. However, as Jarrah said, up at the Mir space station, when they had to change the flag when the Soviet Union fell, they went up there and the old Soviet hammer and sickle flag that they had to take down looked as if the moths had been at it. It was just tatters because of micrometeorite impact. Up on the moon, that would even be a bigger problem. Scott, I think you mentioned this on a previous program.
Micrometeors, they would just pulverize that flag.
Yeah.
So here it is here in the largest version of it that they've got. Now you can see the clarity of the water here. You have to look carefully in here, but you can see that it's actually wet in here as well. You can see the difference between here and here it's wet. But you can see the water drops, you can see everything. You can absolutely see the discoloration even in here. You can see it's drying off on the edges here a little bit. even the stars are wet, and you can see where it's dried off a little
The
bit.
stars are catching the light. If you look at the edges of the stars, they're catching the light, which proves
Sure
that
they
it's
are.
in the light and it's not a shadow. It's definitely wet.
You can actually
That's
see
right.
the difference between the shadow area and the wet area. You see, there's a shadow area at the where the cursor is now, and then there's a couple of
Yeah.
inches, and that's the wet
But you,
area.
you see
as well.
this area right in here?
Yes.
It's actually wet. Not in shadow. That's dry. This is wet. All the way down through there. And it goes right into the red. Like I said, it's because it's nylon. See this spot here is wet.
The star that's just a bit further back down to the right. Yeah, I think it's that one. If you zoom
This
in
one?
on that one, Scott, yeah. Just to the left of that star, there's a dry patch appearing in the damp patch.
Here, along
And
the edge there.
just to the left of the star in the blue area, there's a light bit of blue in the dark patch of where it's damp, which proves that that is definitely drying back.
But you can see the difference in all of the stars here, the difference between wet and dry. This one's fairly dry, this one's really wet. Same down here. This is one of the most defining pieces of evidence out there showing that they were nowhere on the lunar surface because it simply can't be wet.
I've just sent you a document as well, Robert. I don't know if you wanted to open it up. It's the HSOA Journal of Physical Medicine, Rehabilitation and Disabilities document. Basically, the Chinese, according to the research I've been doing, have got the most comprehensive data of how much radiation is on the moon, and it doesn't spell good for any visits to the moon in the future, basically. It's extremely high, the radiation. This document was about 2011, I think it was. It's entitled Apollo Flights and the Hazards of Radiation by Alan Salarian. He's a neuroscientist. I think he's in Greece. Basically, I'll just highlight a few things, but for anyone who wants to read it, it says, in essence, scientific observations suggest deep space is radioactive and incompatible with normal health without effective protection against radiation, and the Apollo astronauts did not have sufficient protection. The irradiation readings from the Apollo 11 astronauts' skin of 0.18 rad significantly did not differ from radiation readings from missions restricted to low Earth orbit, and none of the Apollo astronauts developed cancer, died prematurely, or showed ill effects from radiation. And it says, furthermore, these medical inconsistencies seem to highlight the surprising observations that the Apollo 11 astronauts did not show any signs of space sickness from microgravity upon their return to Earth on July the 24th, 1969. This is a killer. It says, it would be most helpful, ethical and medically necessary for NASA to provide scientifically and valid explanations about the medical inconsistencies regarding the Apollo flights before future manned missions into deep space. And it goes on. And it's basically a medically written document, but it just lampoons NASA for their failure to provide anything of substantial research on radiation. And basically, it looks like these people can't understand how these astronauts got away with it, basically.
Because they never went to space.
Of course.
Other than low Earth orbit.
That's what we've always said. Of course, they won't mention that's the kind of elephant in the room they won't mention in that little report. But yeah, that's an obvious explanation, isn't it, Marcus?
For those that don't know, we're doing a series on Marcus Allen's book here, co-written with Trevor Weaver. Got the idea actually from watching Robert occasionally will narrate some books. And I thought, well, why don't I just do a one-on-one? Instead of narrating the book, we'll go through each chapter. So what I did was I highlighted a couple of salient points from each of his chapters. And I believe, Marcus, there's 29 chapters we're talking about. Yeah.
29.
So I've already posted part 1, and now we're on part 2. I'll post that soon. So we take 2 points. I'll highlight 2 points from each chapter, and then we'll read those quotes to the viewer. And then we'll discuss those quotes in depth. And I find that it took us 2 hours to get through 3 chapters. So it usually leads down another rabbit hole. So you get into one point and leads back into another point. And so it's probably going to be about a 10-part video series on this book. So it's going well, Marcus. So I'm really enjoying it. So I'm happy you are too.
Yeah, it's great because being able to expand on it and refer to the references, because there are 246 references in the book to various films, YouTubes, documents, NASA trying to persuade us that they got to the moon, that sort of thing. Photographs showing that they got to the moon, allegedly, and then demonstrating, that they were all taken here on Earth. I mean, that famous Grand Prix image, the film of the Apollo 16 rover galloping across the lunar surface. How could you get some room big enough to have a vacuum in it? The pro-Apollo opponents will say. And I say it's a model, because then you don't need a very big room. You don't need to make a vacuum anyway.
You don't need to make the vacuum. That's the whole point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's great fun doing it, because given the knowledge we combined have about Apollo, those of us who are detectives can determine that there are many things that are omitted from the record. And I think that's important to highlight, because as soon as NASA comes clean and says, okay, guys, we didn't get to the moon, it was all a fake, and there was good reasons for it, there may well be good reasons for it. I think we've discussed a few of those already. As soon as they come clean and say that, hold their hand up and say, okay, you found us out, or maybe they won't even say that, then we can get on with the real business of getting man into space, because there is a great deal that needs to be understood. I mean, you've already mentioned the radiation and how NASA are not being honest about that. I think that's a very important document. Again, it just backs up what we all know or have discovered over the last few years. And the general public are becoming much more aware of the anomalies behind Apollo. And the more we continue, I think the more people watch it. I notice that the viewing figures go up quite fast whenever Robert posts a new video. There are a lot of people out there interested in what we're talking about, which is great to know, great to see. And that will spread. The famous quote, mankind goes mad in herds and gradually becomes sane, one person at a time. And that's what's happening. We all went mad in a herd because we were persuaded to go mad. We're gradually getting back to sanity. So let's continue. I think we're making a contribution to that here. It won't require that many more people to openly accept that Apollo never happened, for perfectly good political reasons, but we've got to hear what they are. There has to be a degree of honesty. And if the US elections go the way that most people are indicating that they are, first of all, we're going to get the JFK papers fully released. It's already been said, not just withheld. And maybe we'll get more about NASA, because I think that assuming that Trump becomes president again, he will demand that NASA start getting honest. Let's hope so. 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 Let's hope so.